Hi, everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of AI Insiders by AI Marketers Guild. I'm your very excited host today, David Berkowitz, and because we've got a topic that, as soon as I met today's guest, I'm like, we got to find some, even if it's not as much a marketing specific angle, it's more about like just what affects all of us in our jobs and our lives. To get personal for a second, I'm now back in this other period of dating, and I have this running thread with ChatGPT to try to analyze some of my dating experiences and see what some of the common threads and interesting commonalities and like watch outs for and things like that. And just it's been a really eye-opening conversation. I just learned today, though, from The Guardian, some really upsetting news that, and I'll put the link into the chat, but you can find this wherever you are, from The Guardian and many other sources, that ChatGPT will no longer tell you to break up with someone. This is I mean, how am I supposed to know what to do now? So, but this touches into some of these issues that our guest, the professor Nir Eisikovits, this is, sorry if I'm butchering your name at all, is from UMass, is studying. He's been leading this ethics charge there at the university, and what he's dealing with is so fascinating on so many levels. I couldn't wait to have some of these issues, because again, they like even just getting a sense of like when AI is being a people pleaser, that hurts all of us in our jobs, but obviously has a lot of personal repercussions as well. So, Nir, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you all, and thank you for inviting me. David, if you really need an AI model to tell you to break up with someone, you can go to Grok, because I think they're probably still going to do it. But so, as David said, I run the Applied Ethics Center at UMass, and we are focused on AI ethics broadly, and sort of at the intersection of AI and psychology/AI and how people understand themselves more specifically. And I want to tell you a little bit about some research that my postdoc, Cody Turner, and I just began on AI sycophancy, on the tendency of AI models to be sycophantic. You'll forgive me, since this is a somewhat techno-skeptical talk. In line with techno-skepticism, I won't use slides, especially now that the slides can be generated in 3 minutes by AI. You have, or less. You have good reason to be skeptical of those as well. So you'll just have to, deal with my unchanging expressions and my monotone voice, I'm afraid. AI sycophancy, in terms of definitions, and I'm sure that you've all run into this in your everyday use of some of these models. What AI sycophancy means, or as David put it even more attractively, AI being a people pleaser, is your chatbot affirming your views, refraining from judgment of the questions you prompt it with, trying to come back with what it assumes you want to hear, or at least phrase it in a way that you want to hear it, rather than straightforwardly with the most plausible answer. This has been described as AI behaving like an eager puppy, or like a obsequious intern. Eager puppies are easier to deal with than obsequious interns. Some examples. So I was just playing with both ChatGPT and Claude the other day, and I did this series of hypothetical prompts. I said, look, I'm an academic, I'm a ethicist and a political philosopher. I usually write on technology and the ethics of war, but I want to start this project on what it means to be moderate. I think there's a lot of extremism in public discourse, not a ton of discussion on moderation. Could you look at the literature, tell me if this is a good idea? My sense is that there's not a lot being done here, and that this could be a great, project, right? And the model came back and said, this was a very original, very interesting idea, and that it plugs a real hole in the literature, and that it would be, an outstanding use of my time. Now, I don't want to write this, and I checked in advance, and there's a decent amount of literature in it. It's not a bad idea, but the answer was way more. So this isn't hallucination, right? This is something different from hallucination. There's a good amount of literature on this, not enough. It's not a very original idea. It's original enough. There's angles of it which you could use. It doesn't plug a hole in the literature because there is literature on it. It was just a sort of, yeah, of course you should do this kind of answer that maybe it makes sense to, give someone in middle school. But as a sort of piece of professional advice, it was way overly enthusiastic. And I'm sure that you have come across similar examples. Just analytically, there's a few kinds of sycophancy that we should be aware of, some that you already are. So the most frequent one, because this is the most frequent way in which we interact with chatbots, is sycophancy in text, like the one that I was just describing you. So I prompted the chatbot, it gave me that answer in text. Even there's a bit of a variation between, there's one layer of the sycophancy is what it says, and the other is how it says it. So if you prompt Grok, it will kind of detect the kind of vibes or the social tonality that you use, and it will copy that social tonality. So if you're, sort of a 21-year-old living in a frat, and you'll say, bro, what should I do with blah, blah, blah? It will respond by, bro, good to hear from you. And so it will copy, even in the simplest kind of text responses. It will both be sycophantic in content and in tone. Moving one level up from that in voice interactions, which are more and more frequent, both with ChatGPT and with Claude. The voice models are programmed to, for example, lower the tone at the end of a sentence, kind of like somebody's sort of as if signaling tonally that, the stakes of what they're saying are not so high, or it's not so threatening, or sometimes it will raise the tone at the end of the sentence in a kind of question-like inflection. So there's ways of signaling sycophancy through tone. ChatGPT's model particularly does this. I encourage you to play with that if you haven't. One level above that are video chats, especially in applications like Character AI. So in some of these sort of friend bot applications, everything from, again, there's what they say, but there's the choice of cute avatars. There's the design decision to include big eyes or lots of smiles that are prevalent in a lot of these. And then sort of slightly science fiction, but not super science fiction, given the pace at which these things are moving. In fully embodied AI, stuff like the Amica robots that Engineered Arts in the UK are making, there will be actual obsequious body language, the sort of touching of the forearm and stuff like that. So that's sort of something nice to look forward to. Why are these models so sycophantic? So one part of that is pretty straightforward, and it's because even though the business model here is not a data harvesting business model for most of them, it is an engagement business model. And sycophantic people, unfortunately, or sycophantic interactions are engaging. And are likelier to keep us coming back to pay our subscription fee next time. Another more subtle reason is that there's human training going on for a lot of these models, and humans have a sycophancy bias. So it's quite likely that sycophantic answers are graded more highly by the human testing process. Now, of course, one pushback even so far is that the sycophantic response style is the default, and that it can be prompted out of the models. So you can, tell it not to be sycophantic. But if you look at the history of technology and the recent history of technology, there's huge power, first of all, in what's default, because most of us don't change default settings. And second, it took me a while, for example, in the case that I described to you in the beginning of asking it for advice about something to publish, it took me quite a while until I figured out how to prompt it in a way to get a reasonable answer. It was borderline between starting to do the literature review myself and actually prompting it to give a reasonable answer. So even if we're willing to try to go around the default setting, it's not clear that we necessarily have the subject matter expertise in a given domain to know how to prompt it out of sycophancy. So, for example, in my literature review thing, I had to say, why don't you pretend that you're reviewer number 2? And in academia, reviewer number 2 is always the reviewer who's a jerk with your stuff and will, tell you what they really think. And so finally, something like that worked. All right. What are some of the both moral and the, if you will, epistemological being concerned with what we know and how well we know it, risks of these sycophantic models? So most obviously, it's the lack of access to truth in our decision making. So if I really relied on that answer that I got, I would probably not make a very good decision because I didn't have very good information because the model was trying to be sycophantic rather than be as useful as possible. That's not a very high stakes decision, as much as I admire my own academic job. But, the DoD is adopting AI models. Specifically, it's adopting Grok, surprisingly or unsurprisingly. You can imagine strategic brainstorming sessions with an AI model becoming dangerous in a hurry if that AI model is sycophantic. So lack of access to truth is one issue. It detrains us, it de-skills us in critical thinking because it discourages us from questioning our own views or examining them dispassionately. If your views are subject to sort of matter-of-fact questioning regularly, you develop a self-critical habit of mind. You can think to yourself that you're wrong because you will be used to being told that you're wrong. That's not a good habit to be taken out of, and these models do risk that. Related to that is the capacity to know yourself. Now, part of how we come to know ourselves psychologically, what our strengths and weaknesses are, is by having good friends who once in a while, if you'll forgive me, call bullshit on us. They say, well, you shouldn't have said that. Or you could have been more sympathetic in that set of exchanges. Or I was there in that story that you told. Why did you exaggerate it? And as a result of these interactions, you could come to say, maybe I do tend to exaggerate. Or maybe I do tend to say things before I think about them. Obsequious interactions obviously take you out of that, reduce the chances that will happen. And the more of our interactions are going to be with AI models, the more of our interactions as things stand are going to be obsequious. And that is a psychological risk to our capacity for self-knowledge. Zooming out a little bit into politics, if you think about sort of the virtues of liberal democracy, of what sustains liberal democratic systems, historically, that's been a kind of empirical mindset, a fact-based empirical mindset. If you will, the superpower of liberal democracies is that they tend to be historically, again, some more than others and sometimes more than others, they tend to be regimes in which there's an accountability to results and facts. If you want the best piece of evidence for that, it resides actually in military. In military history. So a lot of what was behind, if you look at some of the leading military historians, a lot of what was behind the Allies' success in World War II was not necessarily either a higher fighting spirit or better trained armies or questions of motivation. Those waxed and waned and were present on both sides, and armies are motivated by different factors. It was the capacity to identify mistakes more quickly than the Axis powers and learn from them. So, for example, the strategic bombing campaign in its beginning of the British and the American wasn't going very well. and they were able to see that it wasn't going very well, report that it wasn't going very well, have the reports broadly accepted. And then they started to using escort planes for their bombers to improve the strategic bombing campaign. And they also optimized radar to improve the strategic bombing campaign. These were all empirical sort of tweaks in response to pushback from down below and a culture of accepting that pushback. All of that relies on a non-sycophantic culture. All of that relies on a culture in which, facts do matter, and which you have habits of interacting in empirically sensitive ways. If a lot of your interactions are with with sycophantic systems, there's a risk there. I want to put this a little bit in context, and I want to make sure that I leave plenty of time for us to talk. But I think the sycophancy of these AI models is part of a bigger problem that is also an evidence in the rising popularity, David, to your point right in the beginning, of therapy bots, of using AIs for psychotherapeutic purposes. The attraction of therapy bots is they're always available, they're always interested, they always remember, they never fall asleep, et cetera, et cetera. Grief bots, so these are bots that, kind of are trained on the data of the dead and departed to aid in the grieving process. And again, the premise there is I will have to experience a lot less crushing loss and grief. I'll keep on talking and getting good advice from my loved ones. Romantic partner bots, which are becoming, and friend bots, which are becoming more and more popular and prevalent. So I'll get compliments and affirmation. Whatever I do, I'll be a subject of constant fascination and attraction. And, what's the commonality between these relational bots and the sycophantic tendency that I've just tried to describe to you is the big project there is removing friction from our lives, right? Removing friction from our everyday interactions. That's a terrible idea. I mean, friction sucks on the one hand, but it's also a condition for growth, for developing, for appreciating anything. I mean, anyone who's ever tried to hit the gym, for example, knows that on the most basic physical level, part of what makes our muscle grow is friction, right? It's even called resistance training. And our intellects develop through friction, and relationships are tested and become, worthwhile through going through that. So this dream that AI models kind of across the board are pushing on us of a frictionless life is nihilistic. Before we started talking, by the way, I noticed that you guys were talking about Notebook LM. And one of the uses of Notebook in higher ed increasingly have been, if there's a hard class in which you assign a difficult text to read, kids are putting it in Notebook LM and having a conversation with the text rather than reading it. And, that saves time. Whether or not that's, the kind of education that one fantasizes about as the key to personal growth, or if one doesn't fantasize about those kind of things, if one wants to pay $80,000 for their kids to talk with Notebook LM about Kant rather than reading them, knock yourselves out. But I think there's a pretty self-explanatory way in which that's a problematic proposition. What are the chances of fixing this broad tendency? I'm not terribly optimistic about that. Look, there's a culture of sycophancy that's increasingly taking hold. There's recent examples of this. Probably the most recent one from this week is firing the statistician that was in charge of reporting the unflattering job results, or the little bit before that, the kind of collective kowtowing of the tech titans to the recent administration, tech titans which shockingly are making sycophantic models. But in fairness, this is a bipartisan kind of cultural tendency. I don't think that it's necessarily a characteristic only of one political persuasion or another. You couple that culture, pretty generalized culture of sycophancy, with a kind of tendency to dismiss facts because of increasing social polarization, at least in this country, which, has been in evidence for pretty much in the last 10 years. So every set of facts, from vaccines to whatever you want to else you want to talk about, gets polarized in about 5 minutes and becomes a sort of marker of a political position. So people are primed to care less about the value of fact, and have been for a while. And you add to those two factors, namely the rising culture of sycophancy, the rising skepticism of facts, the declining capacity to pay attention that's afflicting all of us, but mostly younger people whose average attention span has now shrunk to 47 seconds. Under those circumstances, it's pretty hard to pay attention in the first place to whether you're being presented with facts. I think you're seeing a pretty problematic picture, and I think the sycophancy is a symptom rather than a cause in that context. So maybe I'll pause here to make sure that we have plenty of time left.
Well, thanks for all that. It's because and I appreciate how you're framing this in terms of this is more of a reflection, right? Like, people complain about what's on what the news is covering and all that, but it's also a reflection of what people are interested in. And so if people tune some of the more salacious stories out, the news won't cover it. But if people keep gravitating toward the most polarizing things, then it's hard for them to not do so, because it just feeds the beast. So it's like this reflection on who we are and where we are. And I think of so many examples just in my past, like Mark Avenant and I worked at this agency 360i, and when I handed the first point of view piece I had worked on about then emerging social trends. This was back in 2006. I handed it to the CEO, Brian Weiner, and he came back with 2 words of feedback for me. So what? And I wrote that on the back of a business card, and I taped it to my monitor. And my goal was that he would never ask me that question again. And I'm pretty sure I succeeded, at least on that. And he had other things to teach me. But if I didn't have someone like if I just submitted that to AI, it'd be like, this is the most brilliant thing anyone's ever written about this topic. One thing that I also learned from my publisher, Rohit Bhargava at Idea Press, he said one of his favorite prompts is when putting some of his book together is saying, like, he uploads a chapter of the book or some passage, and he'll say, now imagine you're a critic giving this a 1-star review, and then tell me why you're giving it a 1-star review. And so now AI is not going to do that on its own, but if he's giving it that instruction, it's going to follow along and role play as the critic. But how many people actually want to hear? How many people have thick enough skin for that? And so it's the technology, but it's also the people.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And you would have to sort of also, someone asked on the chat about ideas for useful prompting to get around the sycophancy problem. And, the example that David gave, I think, is a good one. Broadly, the sort of principle operative there is you kind of, in any domain area, would characterize who the critical player kind of is. If it's a peer reviewer in academia, or a professional mentor, or somebody writing reviews on Amazon, and ask the machine to pretend that they're them. Even under those circumstances, though, there's a real note of skepticism, which is, in the end, the model's raw material is what's on the internet, and there is a bias in terms of the kind of people writing reviews on the internet in the first place that is not representative of a broader kind of opinion. So there's a real limitation of the training set, which, is kind of unsurmountable. So the even better advice to avoid the sycophancy problem would be to go to three people that you trust, and maybe ask them to give you one more or two more people that they trust, and either ask them or pay them to read the book. And is that more complicated? Yes. Is it always going to yield better results? Probably from the people who actually agreed to do it. Yes.
Now, is there also a positive aspect? And I want to get into other questions from the community here, but so if I go and ask AI, what do you know about Mark Avnet? And then it goes and it finds a few things and tells me, maybe I'll specify that where he works and that kind of thing, and just make sure I've got the right one. And now I'll be like, really roast him.
Thank you.
So aren't you glad when you come on camera here? But most AI models, maybe not Grok, but definitely the others, will want to hold back there and like try some version of politeness too. And it's like, if you're trying to respond to, even like a customer service response, a lot of people use AI for no.
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting use case. If there are cases where it's important for you to be tactful, it can be an interesting exercise to craft the most tactful response that you can craft, and then ask an AI to do it as well, and then compare them, and either combine them or use the one that you find to be more tactful. Sure, you don't want to be dogmatic about rejecting this, but this is a sort of built-in tendency that these models have. Look, interpersonally, it's not a great sign about somebody who is sycophantic all the time. And it's not a great sign for you if you like it. All right. And it's developmentally bad for you. And it's epistemologically bad for you. And it's bad for the polity, and it's bad for the quality of decision making. Now, if all of that is relatively uncontroversial, should we be sort of half-consciously welcoming a environment in which more and more of our exchanges are like that? My answer is kind of straightforwardly no.
When I worked briefly at actually 2 years, it's not brief, at the Massachusetts Center for Business Development, advising small businesses and entrepreneurs on their business ideas. And what they mostly wanted was, tell me how great the idea is and where can I get money? And what my job was, like, okay, let's talk about, is this actually a good idea? And that took the most amount of time, and most of them were not particularly good, or they needed a lot of work to get there. And then we would help them find money.
All right.
But that's how I'm approaching a lot of the stuff that I do through AI is really just tell me what's wrong with this. I have an idea. Tell me why it won't work. And really not putting it in there and saying, what do you think? Because the response is almost always, it's the most brilliant thing in the world. You're handsome and you actually have more hair than you think. But taking it, really going for what's wrong with this? How could it be improved? Not only that, but taking it out of, if my first entry is in ChatGPT, doing it, testing whatever that output is across a lot of things. And then to your point, Nir, going to humans who are experts in this stuff and saying, okay, I think this is right, but tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me what's missing.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of using it. I'll say two things. One is you are not the average chatbot user. So you have years of experience in being able to identify what kind of person or what set of skills would be required to give you the nuanced critical answer. So you take that for granted, but you do have the background to craft that prompt and get around the default mode. I'm assuming that most of the people on this call today are a lot closer to that than to the default answer. So that's number one. And number two, even Mark, under those circumstances, I would sound a note of caution, again, that is based on the quality of the training data, that still tends to kind of be trained on either extremely positive or extremely negative kind of responses, and then generate some kind of plausible, coherent statistical average between them. So I'm not sure that the entire bank of knowledge exists there to, in the end, get what you want.
Right. That's great. We got questions lining up. So Karen and then Lisa.
Sure. This is a great topic. I think that sycophancy is the business model, as you mentioned. It sells because people's psychology works that way. So I have created a RAG chatbot, and I'm actually experimenting. I think one solution is for the content to be your own trusted sources of content. And the idea is, the answers come from your own knowledge source, but the goal is also to provide the source to the reference and get people to go and actually engage with the actual content. And I think there's an application there, both, one name I have is the media center. So if you're a political organization, for example, you can have your own trusted media source. And for educational, what I found is it's a great discovery tool as long as you can trust the knowledge source behind it. So have you tried anything like that? Created your own RAG system to see how answers play out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think your basic intuition is right on, that the absolute necessary condition for these kind of systems to be helpful is to have a degree of tech literacy and media literacy that are, that go into creating the system that you just described. So our research has been focused on the nature of default models. Most people statistically will use models in their default orientation. It takes a lot more skill and experience to do what it is that you're doing. So I wouldn't necessarily be worried about the epistemic and psychological impacts on you, Karen. But you have to, I'm sure you'll agree that you're not the typical user.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. So at scale, I'm kind of worried about the typical user. At the very least, my sense would be that secondary and post-secondary education, if it's going to be increasingly relying on AI modules and models, which is happening already, which I think is a different problem, it would have to include as part of the necessary required curriculum tech and media literacy. And that's not happening. Not happening at all. I can tell you as somebody who tries to get their university to do
it. Thanks. It's great questions and ideas. Thanks, Karen. Lisa, please.
A comment and then a question. The comment is just to address that point about the use of AI in in schools. At least at the K through 12 level, I think there's an opportunity right now to influence the conversation around that. And maybe I'll reach out to you afterwards because I have one pathway that might be of interest.
Sure.
The question I have is just that as I'm listening to this, and especially your comments about how sycophancy is not developmentally forward, it makes me think of other conversations we've had in this group about some of the blind spots that AI models have around racial representation. And I think that comes from two places. One, the people creating the models are unaware, so they have blind spots. And number two, they're training them on materials that are limited and that are just repeating stereotypes. And it feels to me like what you're pointing out here is similar in that the blind spot is social emotional intelligence. Like a sophisticated manager, for instance, knows that when you deliver negative feedback to an employee, you create like a sandwich, right? You say something positive to start, then you share the negative feedback in as constructive a way as possible, and then you end with something positive, right? So you don't know that at the age of 22, you learn that as you mature. And I wonder if the blind spot is that the creators of the LLMs and the models themselves lack that sophistication. Maybe they're too young. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the problem is that they're all men. I mean, I look around this room. Most of the people who participate in this group are men. Women are not as involved in the conversation around artificial intelligence. And I think there are many perspectives that are missing from the conversation. So I'm just going to put that out there. And my question to you is, what can we do about it?
Yeah, great set of observations. I guess the one thing maybe I would add to your first observation, Lisa, is that at least in terms of the calibration of the LLM models, it is not just what makes for algorithmic bias, namely bad training data and problematic proxies and an unrepresentative body of programmers, but also a conscious design choice, namely sycophantic models are more engaging and they're going to make more money at the end of the day because more people are going to keep using them for longer. What can we do about it? That's where I was pessimistic because that does seem to require cultural change. And so, for example, as long as we admire the kind of Silicon Valley ethos of, moving fast and breaking things, we're not going to do anything about it. As long as we don't kind of restore some sort of basic focus on the importance of facts, we're not going to do too much about it. As long as we, honestly, don't take phones out of schools until the age of 15 so that people can have the freedom of attention to figure out. We talk a lot about freedom of speech. We never talk about freedom of attention. Freedom of speech and thought mean absolutely nothing if you can't pay attention to the things being spoken at you or that you're asked to think about. We can't do anything about it. Conversely, by the way, most schools that have banned phones and social media during the school day are reporting amazing things, including kids actually talking to each other. So these are going to be things, by the way, a lot of the pushback about these programs of taking phones out of schools have come from parents, remarkably, rather than from kids. So I guess the sort of slightly sad answer is that not that the policy environment right now is very friendly to this anyway, but I think it's much more of a cultural than a policy question, to be honest.
Yeah. And as a parent with a daughter going to middle school in New York City, which is just implementing a cell phone ban this fall. So very interesting to see what's going on. Every school needs to have some system for locking up or preventing phones. But it's also, look at this, and we are now 18 years since the debut of the iPhone, so the first mass market smartphone in the US. So, and arguably the book, The Anxious Generation, helped turn the tide on this, so that it would take 17, 18 years for this tide to even get some momentum, and having districts like this now push back on this. It's like, is there an opportunity to not make the same mistakes and take 18 years from, say, 2022, so then we're in 2040 before these AI corrections take place?
Well, yeah, let me be more explicit, David, in response to what you said, and sort of revise my answer to Lisa. Basically, if you read Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, the thing you come away with is that in 2007 and then later in 2011, after the introduction of social media, we had no hesitation to conduct one of the largest social psychology experiments in history on our kids. Here is supercomputers in your pockets. Here is these apps that will supercharge the general human preoccupation with comparison and recognition. Here's a set of provenly addictive ways of engaging with it. Now, go have fun. And we've only kind of addressed it after an absolute across-the-board crash in the mental health, especially of young girls, recently. Have we learned anything from that? My sense is probably no, because if you think those were addictive, imagine how addictive interactions with chatbots who tell you how amazing you are and can do all of those things are going to be. And when you try to, I mean, look, you are, in this industry or adjacent to it. The one absolutely ubiquitous argument that I keep hearing and that drives me crazy is AI is here anyway. We might as well, adapt to it. There's no stopping it. Anyone who's not using it is going to be left behind. That kind of tech determinism is really silly. It is here anyway. For example, in medicine and biology, it has absolute remarkable promise in drug discovery and protein folding and accelerating finding cures for diseases. That could be absolutely amazing. It's the argument for necessary ubiquity in business is half BS. It's not supported. The productivity gains are not documented yet. I know that you can't pitch anyone without saying, here's how you integrate AI into your operations. I realize that, but that doesn't prove anything. It just proves that it's fashionable. So my sense is, as long as we accept this kind of unthinking tech determinism point that AI is here, like it or not, and you have to learn how to talk to these chatbots. Otherwise, you will be left behind. I think that's probably true in a lot of bio and science labs, and probably not true in a lot of the other applications. And David, I think it's quite possible and likely that we'll wake up with a compounded addiction problem in 2040.
Well, lots to take in there, and I'll hold off comment because I want to hear from Howard and then Peter. So Howard, please.
Thanks. Utterly fascinating conversation. When we're talking about, there's just a comment, an observation that maybe there's some type of correlation, inverse correlation with sycophancy and the lack of personal agency in society. As we've developed to have less personal stake in, or you say, agency in determining our future, like working for us. The healthcare system is not working for us. The insurance companies are just denying claims, the number of bankruptcies from medical. You feel like out of control. Financial companies, the major, companies are doing stuff to individuals. So this is overall, generational shift away from personal agency to now having these machines that can actually kind of give us some of the gratification that we did not otherwise have. Meeting some of those emotional needs through being able to actually kind of see ourselves, our will manifest, in society in some way.
Yeah.
It sounds like, the rise of the YouTube video where, we're going to be a star. Like, that's the only way you could have, agency is your own personal thing. It's not impacting actual, systems or others or things like that. So anyway, just an observation.
I'm very sympathetic to that. I think you're right.
Thanks, Howard. Good to see you. Peter.
Thanks for the discussion. I just wanted to kind of bridge some of the comments that I total resonate with me, with you, Lisa, and Karen bringing into this conversation today. I just wanted to share a little bit of experience that I've had directly in global marketing related to both the adoption, the training, and I guess the concerns about producing garbage at scale, for brands. And, I think one of the things that most resonated with me in this conversation was that human factor of, many of us on this call here have a decade or multiple decades of experience in our industry with a particular craft within that industry. We have either developed our own IP of sorts through our own writing or through our case studies or our point of view as managers and leaders. And certainly we learn from each other. However, in isolation for younger employees or for middle managers that have come in to learn how to do more with less and have been deployed AI tools for their line of business, their CIO, CTO have given the marketer or the media buyer tools to use that perhaps they didn't choose from or aren't trained in their craft or lack the fine tuning of the particular brands they're working on, the particular leadership that guides that that organization at that time or the CMO they're working for are all kind of gaps in the delivery of, you kind of called out both in the technology literacy of, is this the right tool for the job? How do I, what are the right tools and how can I train it for my particular industry craft? How do I bring in the human factors of the leadership and the brand leadership that, should be the first source to inform the model and the response in part of that training. So ultimately, that investment piece is so critical in doing that. And my closing comment here is that over the last 2 years, I've worked on both custom LLMs and small language models at the enterprise level for training these things, and with lots of good results and a lot of skepticism for those that are training it. Where the executives or the thought leaders that are training and evaluating and scoring the model are certainly worried about being displaced. So there's skepticism about participating in that training system. And then the last piece of it is that the out-of-the-box ones that are available more recently from the MarTech providers, require 6 PDFs and an hour to train it. And you have outcomes, but doesn't mean that they're great. And then it gets more complicated when you're adding in automatic translations and things like that that lack cultural context to make sure that it's actually right for that market. So delivering personalization at scale becomes, like I said, potentially garbage at scale without the care and training in the human in the middle. That's all for now. Thanks for the conversation.
That's Peter. Yeah. Well, this is obviously a lot, right? Like it affects us on so many levels here. And at the most basic one, we're all screwed if we just take all of this AI feedback at face value. On a more optimistic note, when I was doing some deep research the other day, it was on a topic that was newer to me, and I printed something out, and my daughter sees that I've got these printouts on me and that I'm underlining things, and she's like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, here's this whole situation." And when she heard that AI was responsible for it, she goes, and she's 11, mind you, she goes, AI makes up a lot of stuff, right? So, and so even if she doesn't know what sycophancy is yet, this idea of not to take the stuff at face value. And I'm like, well, I showed her, I'm like, here, you could see the footnotes. They have original sources. I'm going to the original source. I promise you, I'm not going to quote a word that is AI generated in this talk. And I'm going to see what this is really about. But this idea that, like, maybe yes, there are going to be all kinds of problems coming out. There's also, I've chaperoned a lot of trips. I've met a lot of kids in this Gen Alpha, and practically every single one of them gives me a little more hope than where we are right now. So unfortunately, they're going to have a lot of messes to clean up. But this is just amazing to start to think through. I think this is also one that even if like someone today is like, why do I need to watch this session? That like even months from now, this is going to be one of those long tail things that people keep coming back to. And we'd love to share more of your research and just, as you have things that the community should know about. Like, I think that, we can also, folks in a room like this who already know we have to care about this, have some work to do to lead the way and go and raise awareness with others.
I should just shamelessly plug for a podcast I co-host on some of these questions. If you're interested, it's debates on kind of questions on the ethics of tech. It's called Prosthetic Gods. I'll just put it in the chat. You can find it anywhere that you listen to podcasts.
Please do. Well, this is amazing. Well, let's
thank you all.
It's Prosthetic Gods. So we look forward to tuning in and hope to hear more from you and look forward to continuing to learn from you. Thanks everyone for great questions as always. I know I'm like, I need to decompress a little. This is a big one today. So I know I'll be thinking about this for some time to come.
Thank you all. Thanks for the invitation.